Hi, and welcome to CoB. We know this isn't normally what you hear at the top of any episode of ours so far, but this one is special. We're coming up on our 50th episode, and Sudeep and I really want to thank you for listening, for the comments you've sent, for the feedback you've given us, and especially for the suggestions of the topics you've made, because that's where we sometimes struggle because we don't know what to talk about. And we've leaned on you to tell us what you want to listen. And that's helped us a big deal. And going forward, we'd love to organize this a little better.
So, guys, the idea is to try and get to know you and your preferences better. And to facilitate that, we'll be putting a form in the show notes as well as in the comments wherever you're listening this podcast from. We request you to share something about yourself as well as some of your preferences and feedback for the show, and that will help us customize the content and make it even more useful for you. Looking forward for this small help from your end and hoping to provide you content that you will continue to love and continue to listen. Thank you very much.
Welcome to CoB, Conversations on the Business of Brands with Sudeep Chawla and Sharvana Raghavan.
So, Sharon, you've had the privilege of working in some of the well known names and very large companies in your career. And then, second innings of yours as an entrepreneur, I think you've also been able to consult a lot of small companies
True.
and help them emulate some of the things that large companies do.
That's pretty much the gist of what I do. Yeah.
Yeah, because let's face it, a lot of the small companies want the kind of things that large companies do in a little more structured and thoughtful manner, and hence they would come to somebody like you who has the experience, has the wisdom to guide them. Yeah.
Right.
So while I think a lot of the people who have FMCG or large company experience talk about some of the concepts that are used there, and they're heard by a lot of people who work in small companies, why don't we do it the other way around? As I call it, reverse osmosis. So why don't you take today's episode to share what are the key things that large companies can learn from smaller ones.
That should be an interesting one. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess so. And just to make sure that, given your previous dispensation, I'm sure now that I'm giving you a license of indicting large companies, it will invite your wrath as well as your some amount of rant. I will therefore take the side of the large companies and try to present a little more balanced view, lest you condemn them to hell during this podcast episode.
Not at all, but yeah, you're right. There will be a little bit of rant coming out because I'm sure all of us have faced some of the issues in large companies, right? So you know where the funnel gets kind of clogged up and you frustrated, you're so focused on what you're doing within the system.
Hmm.
And yeah, so obviously there will be a bit of rant, but this is a good point. I do spend a lot of time telling the smaller companies to behave like large ones, and this could
Hmm.
be a good point to say what the large companies can take on from the smaller companies.
Yeah, let's get to it then. What would your key arguments be?
See, the one blanket term to say of all the small companies is that they're agile, and all
Hmm.
large companies seek to be as agile as the smaller companies, but it needs a little more nuancing, and agility is interpreted in different ways and in different functions. So if you were to like go a little deeper and understand what exactly this agility is,
Hmm.
then one of the things that I actually come about is the culture building in these organizations. So I have this term that when a company is small, the culture is very organic. Sometimes they don't even have to write it down, they don't have to talk about it, but just the way the founders and the leadership team behaves with the rest of the team, the culture kind of permeates through the different layers that are there in the smaller company. And as the company grows, this organic culture needs a bit of organizing.
Hmm.
And this is not always prioritized in the larger companies, and it's not necessarily in the face of growth. Culture usually ends up taking a beating a lot of the time. And this is not really because anybody is doing, but because as you grow you have people from other organizations joining in. And what over time happens is that there are subcultures built across different power centers in the larger organization.
Hmm.
So if there is one leader who's got his personality within his team, his entire team will behave a certain way. And as a vendor, as an outsider, when you engage with the company, you might actually have very different experiences. And even for employees, every function could have a different experience. Leave them with a very different feeling. Now, this is not great cohesion within the company, because it's not necessarily something the company ends up standing for. And what happens in most of these in situations is that your employer branding becomes a very copcom HR driven lip service, and doesn't necessarily translate into the rest of the organization. Now, when you have the right culture, when you know what to expect in the culture, it actually avoids stress. What is stress? Stress is the fear of the unknown. Even if it is a high pressure culture, I'm not taking sides here, but if you know it is a high pressure culture, that actually eases stress. If you get the context of what I'm trying to say.
Hmm.
And once the expectations are set, you're avoiding stress, your ownership of the employees of that culture and the organization goes up.
Hmm.
And what can the larger organizations do to avoid this is primarily to make culture a critical part of their induction and reviews. When somebody comes in, they probably need to be told this is how the company behaves, this is what is expected of you as a leader, with your team, with your bosses. Simple things like, what is the messenger you use within the company? What is the work from home culture? When you're working from home, how are you supposed to behave with your colleagues? When you're in office, how do you behave? So these are, small tiny things, and if they can set that right, I think setting the culture can go a long way. And as always, this has to stem from the top. You can't build a culture that's very different from the attitude reflected by the leadership. It has to start there and then permeate, and use the other functions to permeate the same culture across levels. So
Hmm.
that's the number one point I'd pick up.
Hmm. On this one, I think the way I will possibly nuance the argument further is that, you're right that in startups, the culture within the company is more homogeneous because a lot of them don't frankly plan culture. The culture simply is a reflection of the founder or the founding team.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And hence, a lot of the time, and because the founder team is usually quite young, driven, and wanting to go for something. A lot of the startups are therefore accused of having very toxic, very fast paced, and very transactional culture. Yeah.
Hmm.
With
Hmm.
a lot of, superficial material benefits of bean bags and pool tables thrown in. Yeah. But, a lot of the companies, unfortunate, it's quite unfortunate. Having said that, equally, I've heard of a number of workplaces, startup workplaces, where founders have been wise enough or they have somebody on their board who is guiding them well,
Right.
so that they are really investing into their culture upfront. But by and large, most of the startups, good or bad, but have homogeneity in their culture because of the way the founder behaves, and
Right.
almost everybody gets to interact with them. And therefore, the point to learn from here is that in a large company also, everybody is going to reflect what their manager is behaving like.
Hmm.
And hence, for a large company, it's critical that all your managers behave in a largely uniform manner. That is how you set the culture. Your company, therefore, is an amalgamation of large number of startup teams,
Hmm.
each led by a capable manager. I'm not taking on this next paragraph just to sing paeans of praise for the place where I work, but this is something that I genuinely, as you go wiser, as you grow older, you tend to start noticing these things. Yeah.
Hmm.
So one of the times having a conversation with our chairman, and he said a very interesting thing. He said that most of the big companies tend to hire very talented, very bright people, and then they leave them that okay, go produce these results. Yeah.
Hmm.
And a saying that goes around in the large companies: hire good people and get out of their way. So that actually allows some of them to evolve their own subcultures.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Very true. Yeah.
Which is how a lot of the companies operate now. The company where I currently work believes in the fact that allowing subcultures like this might not possibly work for the company in the longer run,
Hmm.
and hence they are very interested in what to do and how to do.
Hmm.
Yeah. And hence therefore each business leader, each category leader, each sales leader is supposed to drive their business in a certain manner, and
Hmm.
that manner is uniform across the company. Manner of thinking, manner of approaching problems, manner of looking at results, etc., etc. Yeah. So I think uh, the need for culture needs to be recognized by the person who is heading the company, and
Hmm.
they need to find ways and means by setting processes, getting induction, etc., etc., to drive the uniformity in culture.
Right.
Yeah, but the uniformity is critical. Like you're saying, in startups you're able to see uniformity, it reduces stress, everybody knows what to expect, and that really works for the company, and I think that is what the large companies can learn from.
True.
Okay, what's the next one,
Awesome.
Sharon?
Next one is, I'd say, one of your favorites. I'd say decision making.
Oh, nice.
Because when you work with the larger companies, there
Hmm.
are decisions that can seem so trivial but take months on end to make, and they have these complex hierarchies. So not only saw the large companies as an employee, but even when I work with some of them on and off, when I work with a smaller company or an emerging business with the leadership, the decisions are taken. Yes, no decisions take at best a week to 2 weeks.
Hmm.
The Some larger organizations, my conversations have happened for 3 to 4 months without anybody having any clarity as to where we're headed. And each one has got to answer to a boss or get a sign off from a boss. So they're always looking upward and not taking decisions, or not, maybe they're not empowered to take decisions. And this is something I see very different with the startup world. And I see the hierarchies are flat and very few levels. And therefore, they're given a lot of high decision making powers. And in the larger companies, is that what they can learn is that the cross functional collaboration also is so decentralized. For example, in a large company, the sales and marketing coordination sometimes has to happen only from the top. It has to be driven from the top. Otherwise, it doesn't happen. In startups, what I see is that, okay, do I need to get my procurement guy into the meeting? I will go get him now. Or I will schedule a meeting with him. Next meeting will get done. So I need his inputs for it. So that kind of cross functional tagging of team members happens a lot faster. And to say it is even incentivized in the startup culture, you are incentivized to take decisions faster and move faster. Speed is appreciated more than, say, prudence. And yeah, that does have its downsides too. But this is something that I see extremely positively in the startup world or the small business world that I work with.
Hmm. Fair. I think by and large on the same side as you. The only nuancing I'll possibly make is that large companies have a lot of people who are making decisions every day,
Hmm,
and those decisions, if you largely classify them into two parts: the decisions with large opportunity cost, decisions with small opportunity cost.
exactly. True.
Yeah. And a lot of those decisions are being made every day, and we would have possibly encountered this, what we call as racy metrics:
Hmm,
who is responsible, who is accountable, etc. So therefore a company has to be clear about racy metrics for your large opportunity cost decisions and low opportunity cost decisions,
hmm.
and thereby, like you're saying, incentivize people to take the low opportunity cost decisions and move with it.
Right.
Yeah, I would also say that uh, this is a sub part of culture, as I feel. Yeah,
Right.
as to when you go to a manager, whether a manager tells you you decide and please move on with it, or the manager makes the decision for you. Yeah,
Right.
that actually sets the culture for people, and they start understanding what is it that I'm expected to do.
True.
Yeah, so you're right. Maybe agility in decision making, uh, can be learned in the startup world. Also, decisions with large opportunity cost are also made by the founder.
Just that the founders are available and the flat hierarchy, these
Yeah,
founders are accessible a lot more than in a larger organization.
correct. That's true. That's true. And a larger organization, number one, there is hierarchy. I think the rather than looking at hierarchy as a barrier or unnecessary flab, I also look at hierarchy as set of people available with different sort of experiences who help you make better decisions. So if there is, you
That's
know,
the most positive spin on hierarchy I've ever heard. But I agree with you.
yeah. So like you said, prudence versus speed. I
Hmm.
think that is where some of the leaders and or everybody needs to take a call to say whether this decision needs more prudence or more speed. What's the
Right.
wise combination here?
Right.
Nobody wants to be foolhardy and do 100% prudent decisions with zero speed, or 0% prudent decision with 100 speed. Nobody wants to do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So therefore, you need to judiciously be able to arrive, and hence, in large companies, that those racy matrices exist so that they can help you decide and make those decisions quickly and get on with it. So therefore, uh, for those who are getting discouraged as of now to work in large companies, let me just tell you that it is again up to us to make sure that you are able to set the culture right. But yeah, the thing to learn from small companies or startups is agility in decision making and moving quickly with the decisions. One of the very nice sayings, I don't know who said this, but I really hold it close, and almost every member of my team would have heard this multiple number of times. It goes like, never let perfect come in the way of better.
Hmm.
Yeah, if you are able to make it 1% better, move on, execute it. Yeah, or as my guru Molly used to say, a bad strategy executed well is much better than a great strategy not executed or executed poorly.
Right.
Yeah, so there are no marks for perfecting strategy by spending time on it. Get on with the execution, and hence make the decision, move on.
Thank you for listening to CoB, Conversations on the Business of Brands with Sudeep Chawla and Sharvana Raghavan. Subscribe and learn more at cobcast.net. That's CoBBCAST.net.
Pretty much all the points we talk about today will feed into each other very, very fluidly because
Mm.
it is about one driving the other. So, the next point I want to talk about is innovation.
Okay.
And this is a favorite of mine where I have a very strong point of view
Hmm.
of how innovations are to be run. And I've seen innovations across the companies I've worked in. And there is one company where we did an innovation over 3 years' time. There was a company where we did one innovation a year. And I also worked in a company where we did 6 or 7 innovations a month,
Hmm.
which was, uh, and it was termed innovation, but it necessarily wasn't because they were more product market fit checks than innovation. And innovation, if you see, innovation management is an industry by itself. And I think it's more than about 5-6 billion today. And and only expected to grow even faster. But this is the catch, right? In the larger organizations are the ones that spend behind innovation management. It's not really spent by the smaller companies. And innovation inherently is a risky venture. And innovation management is about minimizing this risk. And even after you spend all the money on innovation management, 90% of the innovations still fail. And the large companies, yeah, the cycles can go on and on. Like I said, can be 2 years, 3 years for one single innovation. I'm not talking about the, okay, there are two kinds of innovations, right? One is the improvement innovation, which we call the existing product development. You improve what you already have, you create variants of it, you create slightly better versions of it. That the large companies are great at, because you have an R&D team that can continuously improve the product. You're getting market feedback. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the really disruptive innovations, which across the world don't seem to be coming from the larger companies. And I'd say I'd incline this more to the FMCG and FMCG like companies, where these innovations are even coming from the smaller companies. And this innovation process itself, the innovation management setup and the systems that are there, is built from a subconscious of wanting to avoid failure and to seek guarantees where none exist. And we end up over engineering the back end of it with a false sense of security. But the system is more looking to justify the resource allocation instead of looking at it as investments for a breakthrough project. That's usually what happens in the larger companies. And I wouldn't credit startups with doing it better, but it is more by default than by design that a lot of the startups don't have the money to invest in innovation management. So things end up happening a lot faster. Instead of checking and running studies, you rather just check it directly in the market. And I honestly believe, especially in FMCG, an innovation should rarely take more than a month to hit the market for a pilot project. We can't just keep talking about it, then checking volume projections. And the startups, what happens is they don't do the production. So they don't have a capex investment. And for good or for bad, they don't do P&L checks too much. They want to figure out if the product is working first, and then put pressure on the procurement to meet the margin targets that they have. And they, like I said, they don't have the money to spend on innovation management, so they'd rather launch in the market and figure out the response. And what the larger companies can take away from this is that there's nothing called a perfect innovation, and there is nobody called an innovation expert, because nobody can guarantee these successes. You need to look at being more prolific than perfect. Like I said, if you can, the more innovations you can get out into the market, the more insights you have, more insights you want to build on, test them directly in the market. Only then will you know whether you're going to win or lose. And this, what it does also, the higher level of innovation builds a culture of risk taking and minimizes your insecurity within the system to get the job done than to get it done perfectly. This is something I almost think is indefensible with the larger companies. So I'll throw it back to you now.
Okay. See, I think you know now that you've taken people through the process and have tried to describe how it usually happens,
Hmm,
I would say that one needs to have a balance between being an innovation junkie
hmm,
versus being somebody who is too cautious to fail,
right.
right? Once I was trying to study the model of innovation of 3M, which
Hmm,
is arguably called the most innovative company in the world,
right.
and they have innovations in very very diverse fields. Yeah. So
Right.
when I was reading through that, one of the key things that stuck me, and I think that is something that I've seen a number of leaders and consultants talk about, is about having an innovation portfolio. And they say that your
Hmm,
innovation portfolio has to have a weighted risk and weighted revenue promise.
hmm,
So therefore your portfolio has to have high risk high reward innovations, something which is paradigm shifting, very
hmm,
very different, promises high reward but has a very high risk of failing as well. And then you need to have on the other spectrum some low risk but low reward innovations, and everything in between.
Hmm.
Yeah. And and therefore have its own horizon, etc., etc. If you don't have this risk weighted innovation available, it means then you are either going very left towards low risk low reward, being an innovation junkie, or or the other side. Yeah, you are not really catering to the needs of the business. Now, from a startup perspective, I think the very fact that they are trying to disrupt the market forces them to look at innovation from the very start.
Right.
Yeah. And hence it gets inbuilt. And you will also find that the 90% failure rate is equally true for startups as well as large companies, right?
Yeah, just that
That's
they
the
fail as a company and not as a brand. And therefore
as a
they
brand.
get counted as a startup failure, not a brand innovation failure.
No, and therefore there are a lot of brand innovation failures also. So they keep
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
they
I was
keep
just
introducing stuff,
exaggerating.
and it
Yeah.
was work doesn't work, etc., etc. So therefore the thing to learn, I think, is that having a portfolio of innovation for a large company, which gives you some part of it gives you large sustainable advantage over a longish period of time, and some part of it gives you small incremental kickers from in shorter range, to make sure that you keep achieving your revenue objective, as well as keep your strategic objective of either renewing your brand or extending your brand, etc., alive, so that your brand keeps moving forward with the consumers. Yeah.
Right.
I think that is how I'll possibly balance this out. And I say this from experience because I got in 2009 or 10, uh, for one of the innovations that I'm working on, and this is something that we have discussed in the past, the gem surprise one.
Hmm.
Because the mandate was clear from the organization, there was a need for the product in the market, and we were chasing an opportunity,
Right.
we were trying to ward a threat.
Hmm.
uh, we were able to launch the innovation in whatever 8 to 9 months flat.
Hmm.
Yeah, and the next year I got the innovation of the year award. And Cadbury was as large a company as one could imagine,
Right.
and there also we've seen innovations which have taken a long period of time, etc., etc., and they've had some very successful innovations. Yeah.
Hmm.
uh, been lucky to been part of 2 3 of them. So therefore I think it's all a matter of identifying a portfolio of innovations that a company would work with, and it is perfectly okay to be a little more cautious about the ones which are high risk high reward ones. You in fact possibly need to judge whether the market is ready for them, or you need to find a way in which you articulate them such that the market is able to understand what you are trying to go with.
Right. And you just defended it, defended what I call indefensible with one of my favorite projects of yours. So I have nothing to say to that now. When you play the experience card, nothing else works after that.
No, I think that is something that even I was surprised with. But again, organizational mandate and the market need makes companies work in a very different manner. So therefore I've seen it happening in front of my eyes, and therefore that was a learning for me.
No, absolutely, completely agree. The speed at which some projects can happen, even within
Yeah.
large organizations, when the right buttons are pushed, is just magical to see.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, what's the next one?
Next one, something I touched upon even during innovation, is
Hmm.
fear of failure.
Hmm.
Now, this again is in the larger companies, people tend to be a little risk averse, and they stick to the letter of their job description a little more than choose to be drivers of the company's long term agenda. And they prefer sticking to what's already proven. They wouldn't want to budge from their comfort zone. And I'd rather not be held accountable for a failure than be accused of being in my comfort zone or following the letter of the law. And that's a culture that I've seen in a lot of the large companies. And what this results in is that people are pulling in very different directions. And you and I would have encountered, like most people would have, marketing has always a conflict with, say, the legal, the regulatory, the finance, the sales has got issues with, again, with the finance team, which is trying to get the recoveries done, which all of this is essential. Now, there are people who can enable business or end up blocking business. And this fear of failure ends up blocking a lot of business progress in the large companies, which could otherwise happen a lot faster. And in the smaller organizations, the agility of people moving, I'm trying not to use the word agility, but the way people can move across functions is something that I've noticed very commonly. So they end up empathizing with another function, and it also comes down to a point of rewarding risk takers in the culture of the smaller and the startup environments. And this actually enables the successful ones to stay ahead of competition. And even that's why they end up disrupting industries which may not have been disrupted for a very long time. And this is something that larger organizations can learn from, in the sense, even moving people across functions and giving them the right to fail, or rather giving them the freedom to experiment and do what's in the interest of the larger picture. I mean, I think this one word covers it all, right? Empowerment. And that is something that larger companies can take away from the startups.
I would possibly draw one exception here,
Hmm.
and I'll possibly say, see, in a large company or in a small company, uh, there are some functions who are supposed to be risk taking and looking, stargazing and a little more aggressive in their approach, and then there are some companies for the need of corporate governance
Hmm.
and you know and maintaining overall controls, who are not supposed to be risk taking. They're supposed to be risk averse. They're supposed to be the watchful guardians. Yeah,
Hmm.
unless you have an open tap on VC money, which a lot of the startups in their previous seasons had access to.
Hmm.
Yeah, so therefore I think from finance or legal point of view, I think their role definition requires them to be the watchful guardians.
Hmm.
Yeah, and people who will be able to kind of warn against potential dangers and make sure that the commercial leaders are aware. I think where possibly a learning can be sought is in the commercial teams, sales and marketing teams, and how high are they aiming. And
Hmm.
therefore, you know if they're aiming very high and therefore exceeding whatever they would have achieved if they were aiming very low or in a
Hmm.
safe zone, is something that every company would want to reward. Yeah, and in fact, in one of the conferences we had a guest speaker from, again, one of the very innovative companies of India.
Hmm.
Yeah, Forbes Marshall.
Hmm.
So
Okay.
excellent shareholder return, very innovative, etc. So their founders were here, and some of the things that we were trying to ask them was that, you're known as an innovative company, how do you sustain that, what do you do for it? And
Hmm.
one of the key points was that we encourage failure
Hmm.
and we discourage non-action. So they've been able to find a way to incentivize action taking, incentivize risk taking, incentivize dreaming big, and disincentivize playing safe.
Right.
Yeah, I think that is something which I thought was very interesting. And again, comes down to culture and the way your rewards and recognition and everything is, and your everyday conversations are being had. uh, and if you are really punishing people for failing, or you are praising people for trying.
Right.
Yeah, so therefore, you're very right, sales and marketing team therefore need to be brave, need to have the mandate to be brave under the watchful eyes of those functions which are supposed to maintain controls within the organization.
The watchdog functions.
Yeah, whichever name you call them, I think they are there for a reason, and they keep your coffers full. Otherwise, if it was to sale, it was left to sales and marketing teams, they would have frittered away everything.
Fair enough. That
Yeah.
takes me to my last point, which again is a function of culture, but it's something that I've noticed can be fixed pretty easily in the larger companies with a little bit of gusto. Is that technology adoption? I'm not talking about technology companies, but I'm talking about non-tech companies and how they react to technology in business. And FMCG has been infamous for this, where any new technology, either in management or in marketing or in sales, is almost seen as something that has got very little significance to start with. And therefore, it's not given its due focus. And a lot of the time, it is always a talent parking point for companies when they have to demonstrate technology adoption to the outside world. And this, over time, it comes to a point where the company is can no longer progress without adopting to this new technology, and that is when everything hits the fan, and then they helter skelter run around and do a jugaad version of the technology adoption that needs to be done. Now, startups on the other side are very open to this technology. The larger companies also could be because the legacy systems are already in place. You don't have a need for the new technology as much as a startup does. And a startup looks at technology very differently. One, large most of the time they're younger and they are tech savvy, but even more than that, they look at technology as an equalizer in the way they work with the larger companies, and they want to leverage technology to gain that competitive advantage to fight with the larger guys in the system. And for the larger companies, embracing technology can only make them more efficient, get them to try more innovation, and actually stay ahead of competition without waiting for these alarm bells to ring from places you didn't expect them to. And but a lot of what I've seen as a difference in the larger companies is that they're investing in a lot of marketing technology. Martech solutions are being invested in, but without knowing how to use them. I saw a survey that 60% of marketing solutions subscribed to by large companies remain unused. And another survey says companies are looking to increase their spend on marketing technology. So 60% is already unused and they're looking to buy more. And that's becoming a bit of a black hole. It is about not technology buying, but technology adoption that the larger companies can actually learn from the smaller companies.
Hmm. Fair. I think it all comes down to what I possibly would term as technology evangelization.
Mm,
So in a smaller company, the technology is evangelized possibly by people from the top, because that becomes the point of difference, or as you said, point of equalization,
mm,
which allows them to play the game at possibly at parity with the larger companies who otherwise have other levers to keep them ahead.
right.
In a larger company, I think uh, the idea should be to, whenever they lay their eyes on any technology, before technology buying, you need the tech evangelists, people
Mm,
who are able to create sufficiently alluring use cases
mm,
before even the technology is bought into. Yeah,
mm,
and so therefore, not only would those use cases keep the user functions interested, in fact they would create sufficient demand amongst user functions such that your adoption happens right from the get go.
right.
Right, I think the you will I don't think the large companies can learn technology adoption from from smaller companies, uh, because smaller companies, that's the raison d'etre for them.
Right.
But the larger companies, if they have to adopt technology in the same vein as the smaller ones, they need to find a way of get evangelization done, which is not the same as induction, Yeah, and
You need sponsors within the system for it.
sponsors within the system, specialists within the system who
Hmm.
set up use cases for everybody. In fact, some of the technology companies are also uh, culprit of this.
Hmm.
You will find Google going to different places, showing, making presentations about how different companies are using Google, etc., and
Right.
thereby possibly creating some amount of demand of various product managers, marketing managers wanting to work with Google and trying to explore something. Yeah, and usually these presentations are made to wider marketing ecosystem.
Hmm.
Yeah, now the point is that while the wider marketing ecosystem is fine, you need one or two anchor points who will be able to evangelize, create couple of use cases, and then take it across the company.
Right.
Yeah, so I think that's where I would say, so this is something where you can learn from the outcome that the smaller companies have got. I'm not sure whether you will be able to learn from the process.
Fair enough. I think it's more about the mindset of being
Hmm.
open to technology than about using it in the same vigor. I think you
Hmm.
put it right.
Yeah. Okay. I think you know we've been volleying back and forth on multiple points, and the whole purpose was to possibly try and present nuanced arguments to everybody,
Right.
and thereby come up with what possibly could be various points of differentiation
Hmm.
as well as adoption for smaller as well as larger companies. And I
Right.
really like the list that you had put forward, Sharon. I think this is something that uh, a number of companies could reflect upon and see whether they're doing it in the right manner and whether their game is up there or not. We spoke about culture building,
Right.
we spoke about decision making, we spoke about innovation, we spoke about fear of failure, and we spoke about technology adoption. And in all of them, the core argument was that on all these five accounts, you find that smaller companies are far more amenable to higher speed of adoption and amenable to far more risk taking in the search of higher returns as compared to the larger companies. And as larger
Absolutely.
companies need to find a way to foster some part of this culture within their organization if they wish to compete with startups, and if they wish to retain some of the natural advantage that they've got over a period of time. Yeah, I love the arguments that you put up, Sharon. I'm sure some of the large company executives would want to talk to you and and check with you as to what is it that they can do about it. And nevertheless, I think some of your clients would be very happy that you seem to have observed some very good things about them
Yeah, I
and
never
are now
tell them this
evangelizing.
to their face though.
Yeah, I know. So now you're evangelizing their case, so they should be very happy, and you should receive some rave reviews on your website.
Hopefully. And I
Yeah.
like your defenses too. I like how you stuck by home territory.
No, the sole purpose was not to defend but to present a nuanced argument. But great. So thank you for this, Sharon. It was a great list. I think should form as a great reference point for anybody who's working in a large company. And for those of you who possibly think that we were a bit unfair in our arguments, why don't you write down some of your comments and arguments and give us a chance to respond to them.
Yeah, that'd
Till
be
then,
great to hear back.
yeah, yeah. Till then, thank you very much, and thanks, Sharon. Bye bye.
Thank you, Sandeep.
Thank you for listening to CoBB, Conversations on the Business of Brands with Sudeep Chawla and Sharvana Raghavan. Subscribe and learn more at cobcast.net. That's CoBBcast.net.